Ahead and start us?
Yes.
Just let me know when you're ready.
We're all set.
Okay, we're calling this meeting of the Community Police Review Board at 5:32. And we will start with our agenda, approval of the March 19th, 2025 minutes. Does anybody need time to look at the minutes before we have any discussion?
Nope, I reviewed beforehand.
Okay, does anybody want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Adam,
Second.
second by Brenda. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor of approval of the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any nays? Hearing none, passed. Minutes are approved. All right, the next section is our public comment section. I'm required to read before public comment. The public is allowed to speak at public comment after first being recognized by the chair, except that any complaints or comments regarding individually identifiable officers are not allowed. Rather, any such comments or complaints may be provided to the board in writing, and the board will forward such comment or complaint to the appropriate person within the Lawrence Police Department. The board may establish reasonable limitations on the allowable length of public comment. Typically, we use 3 minutes. As a general practice, the board will not discuss or debate these items, nor will it make decisions on items presented during this time. I don't see any public in the room. Is there any public online?
Yes, sir.
No?
No.
Okay, so we have no public comment today. All right, let's move to the monthly complaint report. Anthony, Chief Lockhart usually goes through those if you want to do that.
Sure. Anthony Brixton, Deputy Chief. The first is a complaint on a traffic stop in which a rookie officer was with a police training officer. They stopped it for a defective taillight. The person later complained about the taillight. So in the state of Kansas, you have to have 2 working taillights. So at times, what you will see is someone not see the 2 back working tail, or not see the middle tail light if one of the other one's out.
You mean the brake light?
Brake light. My apologies. My apologies. And so the brake light. And so if there's in fact a middle brake light, it is valid. That was a change, I think, about 10 years ago or so. And so that was actually a sustained complaint, but it was a training issue as the trainer didn't catch it as the car stop was being made, and the trainee was still in training, so not quite aware of that statute fully.
And was perfectly honest when confronted.
Yes.
It's a learning experience. Although I have to say, if I were the person delayed by 7 to 10 minutes for that stop, I would probably complain too.
Did the person who was stopped know that it was a trainee that?
I don't know the answer.
The only reason I ask is I probably would have been a little more understanding under those circumstances than.
Yeah, so commonly if you see, not all the time, but commonly if you see 2 officers in car, it's usually a police trainee and a training officer.
Okay. Understandable mistake.
So what does the recourse look like for a mistake made like this with the trainee?
Yeah. So this is a pretty minor mistake. It's a going over the traffic ordinance again and just kind of spelling out what the actual ordinance says and what you are actually allowed to do. It's probably about a 5-minute retraining.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And the complainant has been reached out to since then?
Yes, actually I signed off on a letter, so
Great.
I don't see it in here, but I do remember doing that. So.
Awesome.
Okay, any further questions on the first case? Okay, we have the next case, PC 25008.
This is on April 14th, 2025. A Hispanic female contacted the Office of Professional Accountability via email. She alleged that the officer was noticeably hostile in their tone and intimidating, felt scared and unsettled. The complainant believed that she was treated this way based on the fact that she was Hispanic and also the passenger. It looks like it was conducted for an obstructed license plate. So if you have anything obstructing your license plate, the officer is allowed to stop you to make sure the license is in fact valid or the license plate is in fact valid. He did asked the person to step back to the patrol vehicle so they could collect the personal information. The driver complied, looks like, but then questioned the reason for sitting inside the patrol vehicle. The officer told him it was a routine traffic stop and traffic practices, but the driver still felt uncomfortable and asked if he could stand near the patrol vehicle. Officer asked if they had weapons on his person, consent to pat down, which was denied, and a pat down did not occur. After collecting the information, the subjects were released from the scene with warning for a traffic violation that stopped in about 7 or 8 minutes. The Office of Professional Accountability watched the stop, met with the complainant and watched the stop in the video. The complainant felt that the officer could have done a better job explaining why the traffic stop was conducted in the manner it was, but wanted to emphasize that she felt the stop was racially motivated in that moment.
Do you know how the plate was obstructed?
I do not know.
Yeah, because, you know, if you have a bumper hitch, especially now that we have gone to the extra place in the plates, yeah, that bumper hitch is going to obstruct.
Yeah.
And, okay, I'm playing defense attorney here.
Sure.
But the law is basically that once the officer walks up and can clearly see the plate, and it's properly displayed, lit, and, you know, all that stuff that's required by law, then the encounter should end.
Sure. The typical ones that we see most of all are almost like sunglasses for your license plate. If you see
Right.
that, it's a plastic shield.
Well, it
And then
reflects the light.
Right, and then the second ones that we see quite often is just like somebody's been in some mud, or it's been a snow day, which is typically not
Yeah.
used with the snow day, but the mud certainly is.
But you don't know what the problem was?
No, you can contact Major Cooper at the Office of Professional Accountability if you want to follow.
So you wouldn't be able to answer why, in this particular case, the officer was exonerated? And the reason that I ask that is because I try to put myself into the individual's shoes.
Sure.
And had I been stopped, I would have been really surprised if I had been asked to get out of the car, get into a police vehicle, and be asked to get patted down for a weapon. And I'm kind of curious why, in this case, that was done.
And the principle for bias-based policing, it would have to be that the stop was initiated on that, so that there
Right.
was a valid traffic stop. It sounds like the complainant also, at the time of after watching the stop, didn't believe that that was the case. It sounds like that she felt like that.
Didn't believe that that's why she was pulled over.
Correct.
Okay.
That it was that she felt that in the moment, but based on what I'm reading here, that not necessarily after watching the stop with the Office
Okay.
of Professional Accountability.
So, again, I'm trying to understand how the officer was exonerated in this case. Was it the actions of the person who was pulled over that caused him to react the way that he did?
So there's a lot of different ways that people can do traffic stops.
Okay,
And so, I'm going to give you a couple of examples, right?
please.
I can be a person that does traffic stops and goes up to the driver's side window, okay?
Okay.
Probably the most common one you see.
Okay,
The second most common one that you see is coming up to the passenger side window. Sometimes that's a safety approach. Sometimes it's just because you don't want to get hit by a car and it happens to be a busy highway.
right.
Typically, when people, and I'm going to use this typically, and I am not saying that this is the case, okay? Typically, when people, officers like to do drug interdiction and weapon interdiction, they almost always bring people back to their car. And it's because they're just talking to them and getting a baseline as they fill out a citation or run their information or anything like that. I myself have had that done to me as I was traveling through Oklahoma. So, and I told them,
Okay.
I know you're doing an interdiction stop.
I can say, and I hate to admit to this, but the times I've been pulled over for speeding, I have never, ever been asked to get out of the car or to do anything other than show my license and registration.
Sure.
And I'm just, as I read this, I was just kind of going, okay, so the officer was exonerated for the traffic stop, and obviously I don't know all the procedures that you know, but it just seemed to me that there had to be something else here that required the officer felt that he needed to ask that person to get out of the car. And it's not in the report, so I can't tell.
Right, and you can contact Major Cooper, but we typically don't get in that level of detail in this public meeting.
Okay.
So just to make sure I'm understanding what happened here, so is it typical for someone to ask, like, this complainant, for example, to step out of the vehicle for an obstructed license plate?
So I can speak more to what's typical of an officer. Typically, when they have a method of doing a traffic stop, they're going to repeat that over and over and over again. And typically, and I think Ms. Claire would say this, because they say in court, I do this the same way over and over and over again. So otherwise, they should be articulating why they did something different.
Okay, thank you.
So, I mean, basically, one thing that did was separate the two, so you could, like, check stories.
That is often the case of, especially like I was talking about, of interdiction type stops. Even if an officer is not doing the interdiction stop, then if that is what they commonly practice, they're going to do the same type of stop over and over again.
Yeah, I just think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Michael, but I think both of our concerns here is just that that isn't typical for people, like when they expect to be stopped, that they don't expect to be asked to get out of the vehicle unless the officer expects that they did in fact do something wrong. And I imagine that's where this complaint came from. So just trying to clarify like what that looks like and what that means, and then also get a better understanding of how the police like do their work, you know,
Yeah.
day to day.
Let's face it, it's a much more significant inhibition of their liberty than the typical traffic stop. And with no information about, you know, how the plate was obstructed, was it dirty, was it obscured by a bumper hitch ball? I mean, you know, it.
Or if there was something in the driver's behavior that caused the officer to feel
Well,
that they had to take
exactly.
additional action.
There's a whole lot of information here that we probably don't have.
Yeah, and wouldn't typically get in a summary report.
Yeah.
And that's where, and we've kind of had this conversation a little bit with Chief Lockhart, but I would push back to some extent because I feel that this board kind of has a charge to oversee some of what's going on, and we need that information to understand better. And part of it isn't just us challenging the police department. Part of it is educating us on how it works.
And that education piece is certainly available, and that's why I've offered for you to contact the Office of Professional Accountability. It's Major Cooper. I'm over Major Cooper. Happy to sit down and have those discussions in private. But one of the pieces that the working group instilled when they did this ordinance is that the person who was making the complaint, or in this case the appeal, would want that information out there, would want to do that. So the absence of that is by the very nature of the actual initial complainant not taking that further.
Understood.
Yeah, sure.
Understood.
And I hope this hasn't felt super confrontational or
It
anything.
has not.
It's- okay, good.
Yeah.
It's
No,
not intended to be that way. It's really us trying to understand what happened and
I
determine if there's anything more we should be doing as a board.
Sure.
Okay?
I can say I have been pulled over and I have been asked to exit the vehicle.
Really?
Yes.
Okay. I've never been asked.
So-
I'm not going to
I mean,
admit
it
how
is-
many speeding
I mean, it-
tickets I've received.
I'm
Well,
just going to say,
Highway Patrol does that far more frequently.
Okay.
In my experience, not personal but professional, does that far more frequently, I think.
Okay.
Highway Patrol is probably the most common, and then even the sheriff's office will do that from time to time. And a lot about that is also
Safety.
it's a safety, right? I'm separating these two people. I have some time and distance and all those kind of things. I can tell you that it is a practice that's taught in different kind of car stops
They
classes.
don't have 5 other officers to show up in 30 seconds.
Yes,
Yeah.
hopefully 30, but
Well,
that
I know.
seems a bit optimistic.
You get my point.
I do. There's a big difference when someone is 20 miles away from you than when you may ask for help and you can hear the response coming. So,
Right, right.
I think certainly in a rural setting or a highway setting, I think, just speaking for myself, I've never been a highway officer, but I would probably take that approach in every case on the highway, or
Sure.
most every case, yeah.
You make sure it's one-on-one, you make sure you've got them in a controlled environment. I get all that.
Yeah.
But it is far more common outside the city than in the city. Would you agree?
I would agree with that, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate
You're
you
welcome.
answering our questions. Any other further questions on the report?
I don't think so.
None. Okay. All right. We'll go next to the Caleb Stephens resignation letter. Did everybody have a chance to review that?
I did, yes.
Okay, I asked Chief Lockhart to put this in the minutes, or in the packet today, because I felt that Caleb raised some interesting points, a few of which admittedly I've thought myself, regarding the purpose and what this board is trying to do.
Right.
And I wanted to have a conversation with those of you here present today to talk about what your thoughts are on Caleb's points and whether you agree with them, if you think we should have a broader jurisdiction, and if so, what action we should take.
Let me just first say that Assistant Chief Brixius and I both sat on the working group that produced, to some extent, pretty much the ordinance that was ultimately passed. And I don't think this raises anything that wasn't discussed in great detail last summer and to some extent presented to the commission. I mean, in some ways it's frustrating. I can't sit here and get answers to the questions that I have. I totally understand why, but I can also completely understand why somebody who really wants a more expansive review is frustrated.
Right. And I had this conversation with Chief Lockhart when we were discussing the agenda, and I recognize that these issues were raised, and the commission made a decision in terms of how the ordinance looks. And frankly, of the things that Caleb has raised, I don't feel that this board should be involved in investigation. I don't think we have the skills for it. I don't think it's our purview. What I have recognized is, I guess I was expecting to see more cases appealed that would come to the board and haven't. And maybe that's a good thing, because they're being adjudicated at the police department level, and maybe it's not. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, historically, there are, 2 appeals ever?
I think.
And one somebody didn't show up
zero
for?
to this board.
Yeah, I don't think anything's come to this board.
The one that the board reviewed was just an example. It wasn't an actual appeal. It was a training scenario, and so they took that into executive session. To the best of my knowledge, I wasn't actually here. What I would say is this, and you heard it a little bit in that, is that our Office of Professional Accountability is very open with the person making the complaint. They invite them in. They invite them to watch the video. They have discussions about what the applicable law is or what the applicable case law that they'll be reviewing. They typically, when it's done, they call them back. And I would say, if it's sustained, like if we look at this other one, it's sustained, there's no appeal to that, right? Because the department is saying that this was incorrect. So you're really looking at your exonerateds and not sustains and things like that. I think that this goes through a lot of levels of review, and so the investigators are very aware of what their applicable laws are, what their applicable policies are, and I think as they walk through, this is the policy that the person is supposed to be following. I think most people have an understanding of that. What we see on the opposite end is when we don't do what we are supposed to do, that we take the appropriate action.
Right.
And I think that I can see why this may be frustrating, because it feels like there's not a lot of things coming in. To your earlier point, I think it speaks to the credibility of what is actually taking place. And I think the people who are involved in the complaints are believing that they've had a credible review and a credible outcome. That's what I hope to think. But I think this number over time shows that.
I also hope to think that, and I wonder about there's almost, and by no fault of Lawrence PD at all, but there's almost an intimidation factor that goes along with making these reports and making an appeal to this large government body that I think a lot of people are rightly intimidated by. And again, no fault of your own, you're doing everything you can to open these channels, but we do have to also think about, like, okay, then historically, like, what is people's concern about raising a concern with the officers, with the police department? We also have to think about, the appeals process on its own, how major is the public trust to trust that the police department, in which has potentially done the thing that someone is uncomfortable or upset with, is going to give them a fair review? And I'd hope very much that we could trust all of us can trust the Lawrence Police Department to do that. And I have quite a bit of faith in the people I've met from the Lawrence Police Department to do that. But in general, the public isn't going to have that same relationship with the police, or just the larger idea of police, right? So when I kind of look at like this resignation letter, I see some of that frustration into it, where it's not so much about are your officers following the policy so much as it is, what is the policy and why is that the policy, and why does the general public feel comfortable or uncomfortable with the way that policy is enacted? Mm-hmm. So that's where a lot of my concern comes from. And I also know that that is not necessarily the purview of this board. It's not necessarily our purview to make policy recommendation.
Sure.
I'd be potentially interested in talking about developing policy recommendation, but I also know plenty of people do that already. So I share some of this frustration, and I wonder where is appropriate to dig at it versus where we have to be okay with some of that frustration, you know?
Well, I work in a profession that polices its own, which, and quite frankly, eats its own. And I think there's nobody better suited to judge the reasonableness than somebody who has been in the same situation. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think a whole lot of deference is appropriate. But at the same time, if we are supposed to be kind of an oversight board, the limitation on the information that we get, unless there's an appeal, and I would expect to have a whole lot more in that case.
Yeah.
But, it seems like in both of these cases, I mean.
You're talking both the cases in the report this week?
Right. An explanation of what happened and why was satisfactory. What do you do with that? You say, okay, great.
I think one of the changes really over my career in policing is this right here, right? And the fact that we, not only legally are you allowed to do it, but we're open invitation to have people walk through the body cameras and the dash cameras and talk about what an officer is typically doing helps things explain a lot. It by no means means we're perfect at anything we do, but it actually allows us to teach too when we make mistakes and we see mistakes. For example, the first one that was sustained, that was a mistake on our part, but it actually allows us to go in and train. There's somebody at the door.
No idea who that is.
But, at the same time, it was a really
Member of the public.
understandable mistake.
It is, yeah. Especially in a new training environment.
Right.
All those things. I would like to address the policy issue just a little bit.
Sure.
And so we're really governed in 3-4 ways, right? First, you have a couple hundred years of police experience looking at that, but let's discount that for a minute. Let's just completely throw that away. We use Lexipol Policy Management, which is, I think it's the largest company, don't quote me on that, but it's certainly one of the best, the most professionals. I'll give you an example. We were reviewing our pursuit policy with the city management group just in the last week, and Major Cooper, who's kind of the expert of this, says they have a team, that company, of approximately 30 attorneys who works on this policy to make sure that they're up to date, and then they have training and experts and everything. So while I think it sounds reasonable to go through these policies, I remember before we had Lexipol, it would take us months to get through a policy. In addition to that, our city attorney's office reviews what we have. In addition to that, we speak with the city manager's office. And in addition to that, we are currently in a CLIA accreditation, which our actual accreditation starts, or review starts June. I'm going to say this wrong, mid-June. How about that? It starts in mid-June, which governs a lot of the things that we do, that it says you have to have this type of best practice and you have to prove what you're doing, right? So you say that this policy is the best practice. Now show us from your police reports, from your video, from the way that you log information that you are actually doing that. So I think that there's a fair level of high-level professional oversight doing that. Speaking from my own experience, and this is not to discount the experience of anybody else, but as I remember before we had this, sitting on policy committees and trying to get through a policy taking 6 months and a year and things like, it's just not a very efficient process.
Oh, I'm sure it sounds so fun and exciting,
It is
actually.
not fun and exciting. I can assure you of that.
Right.
But we would never see anything that was a mere policy violation.
No, anything that was the level 1s and 2s, those are policy
Right.
violations too.
Well, they may also be policy violations. but
Yeah, I mean,
okay,
typically, most things that we have are in policy in some way or another. They're addressed, and even if they're a vagueness, like if you have a general conduct, right? So that covers a wide range of things.
Sure.
Any further comments or discussion?
So, and I would invite each of you, if you have specific follow-up, especially on these cases, come down, speak with myself, speak with Major Cooper. I think one of the things, and this was from the board, and I think Brenda will remember this, is that the group really had is, the reason that there's appeals process and that I'm not answering more direct questions in this public setting that's on YouTube is because people have not said, I want my privacy information out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And certainly the officer who's being accused of something has not,
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to pillory somebody who did everything right and
Absolutely.
have public.
Which is why if we
Right.
did hear an appeal, it would be an executive session so that
Right.
it's not out.
Yes, and we wouldn't be able to answer those questions.
I guess what, I'd like to have comfort with the fact that the process, the internal investigation process is working extremely well, which is why we're not seeing appeals. If so, that's great. But if there's, for some reason, people aren't willing to raise these so that the board sees them, that's another concern. I have no reason to believe that's the case, but that's kind of the tension that I feel as a board member I'm dealing with. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
It does make sense, and I think you'd point out earlier that some people may have barriers that they're feeling. I think if you were to talk to someone who's gone through that process, the Office of Professional Accountability is kind of on its own island, right? So there's the lieutenant who's out there, the major, and then myself, and I'm not even in that building most of the time. So it's not, I think when people think they're calling the police department, they're calling the people that just were involved, right? This person's job, his only job is to make sure that we're doing the right things, right? Especially when a complaint is raised, or when we, which I would tell you is maybe more common, that is not reviewable by the board, when we raise our own complaints on our own officers' actions. If you go back in history, when there used to be internal complaints or employee investigations were also counted in the complaint process, what you would see is actually the ones that were derived from the department far outnumbered the ones that were from the outside of the department, whether that's an officer saying, I don't think that this officer did the right thing, or even a supervisor or a civilian employee.
That's a good thing.
It is a good thing. It is a good thing, and we have a culture that not only wants it, but demands it.
That's good, yeah.
Yeah, I can only think of two stinkers, not naming any names.
Right.
Again, based on the letter, I mean, I think Caleb's raised some interesting points and things that I mentioned that I thought myself, but for the record, I don't think that we should have investigatory oversight. That's just not our expertise.
Well, first of all, it's not within the scope of our appointment,
Absolutely.
but absolutely, that's not what we do.
Yeah, it's not. But I have been pushing a little bit more on, and you and I may disagree on this, on the information that we get in these reports. I understand the need for people's privacy, but I also feel like, as a board, we should be asking these questions. We should be delving into this a little bit more, even though they've been resolved. Just understanding and making sure that the public's being served.
And I thought the things that you've asked tonight were fair, right? And
Okay, thank you.
I tried to do the best that I can to answer the things.
No,
that
you,
I can.
Yeah.
it's been great. It's a
Yeah.
good dialogue. I'm
And-
glad we had it.
And so long as the questions are de-identified,
Yeah.
I mean, somebody listening might recognize something.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
so long as it's de-identified, I would appreciate having somewhat more detail, such as some of the things that we had asked about,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
just to get a clearer picture of what happened and how it was resolved.
I'd also be interested in just talking about what are the departmental, maybe not even necessarily like non-policy or not necessarily policy standards, but more about non-policy, like kind of more the culture of why you do things and like working with your officers to be sure that the public on every interaction understands, one, why you're doing what you're doing, and two, what this typically looks like. Like I was thinking about this case with Hispanic female that submitted this complaint. Yeah, I would also feel really targeted if that were me. And I am used to officers just pulling me over and asking me for my ID and my registration. And I would feel targeted, absolutely. Again, we have to ask why that is. And it's not because your officer did anything wrong in particular. It's because this person wasn't familiar. They didn't know. And it's scary to get stopped by an officer at any time. So my thought is more like, your officer didn't do anything wrong. The officer, almost none of these officers have actually done anything wrong according to policy, but we have to find a way to bridge the communication gap between the public and the police department. And so far, I'm not so sure that's the case. And once we bridge that gap, it might be easier to also have that actual exchange of ideas and talk about, okay, like what is fair and like, okay, this does need to be appealed, or like, yes, please submit this complaint so we can understand how to run better. Like this complaint process isn't necessarily just for are you within policy or not. It's also a process of are we doing what's right by the community or not. And I know you agree. I'm just stating for the record.
I absolutely agree. And what I would say is one of our biggest, and it's not necessarily a complaint, but expressions of dissatisfaction actually comes in a misunderstanding of either what police procedure is or what is allowed by policy, if that makes sense. And we could use something very mundane like the ability to go through a red light with lights and siren or lack of, right? Many times we have expressions of dissatisfaction about something that someone did that may actually be within the law or within the more so than complaints, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's typically a process where we sit down and take the time to explain what's actually happening, the reason it happened, what the legal justification may be or the policy justification, or if we did something wrong, right? And so I think one of the great things that Chief Lockhart has helped continue in this organization is we'll be the first to identify if our people have done something wrong and make sure that we get that corrected, whatever the span of that correction needs to be. And it can be a training, it can be a verbal counseling, a written counseling, it can be suspension, and it can be a loss of a job. And we see all those things throughout the course of a year or years. So there's actually a lot that goes on in that. And you were talking about the review a little bit. I wanted to kind of address that because I think it's important that anybody who might be listening kind of has that. So we do have a system that it goes into, okay? And so let's say you call and make a complaint and it's just to the field supervisor because it's a Saturday. The OPA sergeant is the one that picks it up, right? They talk to the major, they may talk to me, they may talk to the chief, depending on the level of it, right? That investigation is either done at the OPA level, sometimes it's kicked back to the street level if it's a lower level investigation, right? It gets fielded through, and then depending on the level of complaint, you're going to have the OPA sign off and categorizing, or if they're doing it, you're going to have Major Cooper. In some cases, then it goes through me again, and then Chief Lockhart. And then in other cases, even more, it goes to the city attorney's offices, potentially human resources, and the city management office. So that's on a higher level, not something like we're reading.
But your point is a lot of eyes are looking at it.
There's a lot of eyes on it. Yeah. And I know that just there's a societal feeling based on what they know, what people see. Sometimes it's based on TV, what they may read. But what I can tell you is here right now, we have a lot of eyes on it to make sure that we're doing the right thing.
I guess I'm thinking just in terms of the numbers, I mean, over the course of a year, you have how many complaints?
So it kind of varies, and it's gone down since we stopped including personnel investigations and complaints, right? But of this, you'll probably see somewhere in the 15 to 30 range in the years.
15 to 30?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
a lot of them are not actually complaints when you get into them. They're a complaint about the department's procedure, right? So this officer did this, but they actually are mandated to do that by a procedure. That does not reach this.
It's just that I would think odds are somebody wouldn't be satisfied with the process that we've gone through, which admittedly has gone through a lot of eyes, a lot of review.
Yeah.
And would want to escalate it. I would expect to see, I mean, just based on the odds, 1 or 2 to go through, and they haven't. And again, that may be that the process is extremely effective, or it may be, to Adam's point, that there's some kind of chilling effect that people are saying, I'm not going to take this any further.
Yeah.
And I hope that's not the case.
Not going to risk it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that we also have to understand that we are, of our 3 levels of complaints, we're looking at the 2 highest levels of complaints.
Right.
Right.
And that is based on
Which is all the more incentive to want to take it forward, I would think.
I would agree with you. I would agree with you,
Right.
because these would be more severe violations,
Yes.
more severe violations of the public trust, of
Yes.
somebody's own feelings. The things that, and I think Member Clary would probably remember this, the things that anybody can typically get complained on for, so the parks person or the firefighter, like, they weren't driving the best, or, they ran a stoplight, those things are all handled not at this level, or they were just in general rude, right? So, so there's more complaints than what I mentioned. What I'm mentioning is those top-level complaints.
Understood. Yep.
You hit on this a minute ago, but it kind of got to my point, is that a large amount of the complaints you see are just procedural complaints, right? And that is my point, is that let's review the procedure then when these things happen, and when we say, okay, yes, our officers were, going by policy, going by procedure, why is that the procedure? I think that was more my interest here. And again, I'm not sure how we make that part of the Community Police Review Board's purview, or if we do it all. But it does strike me that a lot of these are exonerated, but they are still issues that people have for one reason or another that aren't illegitimate. It's just that they aren't something that we explicitly review because they're not policy violations. It's more, maybe we take these as suggestions for improvement, suggestions for, strengthening that public trust, rather than just focusing on when we break it.
Yeah.
Okay, good discussion. Anything else anybody wants to add? And thank you for answering our
Yes.
Absolutely.
I really appreciate it, Deputy Chief. I really do.
Any further comments? So one additional thing that I'll add is when I met with Chief Lockhart to go over the agenda, I did raise, I've got some available time this summer. I did ask to do a ride-along. I would encourage other board members to do the same. And I've also asked for him to just let us know when courses that you guys go through come up. I know we've been invited to attend those, because I realize I don't know what you guys do. I don't know all the processes.
Yeah.
You've got years more experience in this than I do.
And I would actually encourage you, currently we have an academy going on. They're still in the early weeks, so there might be some things that would be attractive to come sit through an hour.
Love to do it.
Or 2 hours. And I think it's really insightful, not just to hear what they're being taught, but the discussion and the interaction with the instructor, because the recruit officers do a very good job of, well, what about, there's 1,000 what ifs, right? That all can't be covered in a piece of paper. So lots of nuances that they get to help walk them through, so you can have good decision-making processes. Some of them are in moments when things are slowed down, and some of them are moments when things are sped up. And
Yep.
so it's all, building that good foundation, that good base of the laws, but just building a good decision maker is really important.
Thank you. You've been through a ride-along, haven't you, Brenda?
Oh, not since probably 2007 or 8.
Okay, but you've at least done one.
I used
I
to,
imagine things have changed since then a bit.
Probably, yeah.
when I was a dispatcher in the early 90s. And
Okay,
like every other week, we were on a ride-along
okay.
to see what's actually happening out there when
Okay.
people are radioing us. Yeah, so I did a lot of them. But things have really changed since then.
I'm sure.
They have. It's become very technology-driven.
Yeah. And when I was in the DA's office, I went on a number of ride-alongs just to help me know what questions to ask.
Good.
So, but
I
I
just,
don't count the years in between.
well, I'm smart enough to know that there are a lot of things I don't know. So I can't answer the right questions unless
Yeah.
I get more information.
Also had the advantage of being raised by police officers and
Yeah.
learning a lot at the dinner table. But I'm not even going to talk about the years since then.
Yeah. All right, good. All right, anything further on this discussion? Good discussion.
Not from me.
Is there any action that's come out of this discussion that you would like to pursue or that you would like to suggest to me as the chair?
Maybe if I have time to noodle on it later for
Okay.
next meeting.
There's always next meeting.
That's beautiful.
All right, speaking of next meeting, let's go to future agenda items. I did ask Chief Lockhart to report out on the findings from the community meeting last summer. He would have done it at this meeting, but he couldn't be here this meeting, and I agreed it could wait till next meeting. So that will be one of the agenda items.
And that's July 16th.
That is July 16th, I believe. Let me check my calendar.
I hope so, because that's what I put on mine.
I was so ready to trust you, I already wrote it down.
I have July 16th.
Okay.
Is there anything else that anyone would like to have on the future agenda? I'll probably meet with Chief Lockhart about a week before the next meeting in July.
And we can reach out to you individually if we think of
Absolutely.
anything.
You wanna send me an email, but don't copy everybody.
Got it.
That's a violation of the act. All right, any further issues to discuss? We good?
I move we adjourn.
Move for adjournment from Brenda.
I second.
Adam seconds. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Meeting adjourned at 6:14.
Thank you again, Deputy Chief Brixius. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.